The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the next episode of the Minnesota Soccer Podcast, a unique episode. We're here even when Minnesota United is not, but we have great insight coming your way as it regards to Minnesota United's next matchup against the Portland Timbers. We have joining us today an avid follower of the Portland Timbers, our scout on the street when it comes to the Portland Timbers, gets us insight and lets us know what's going on with them whenever they're coming to town or whenever we're going to them, like is the case this time around, as the Loons will be headed out to the West Coast in short order. Margaret Hooper joining us, as always. Tom, do you want to add anything to her?
Yeah, so a friend of mine from college, she's a diehard Timbers, Trailblazers, so obviously Oregon connection, and then Orioles, who the Twins started their season out against. But yeah, kind of a fun mix of sports. Anything else, Margaret, I'm leaving out?
The Ravens, but they've been
Baltimore Ravens. Yeah,
challenging to talk about recently, so it's all good.
Man, Joe Flacco's just going to hold that franchise down for quite a while. Moving on. So I'm so glad we have you with us today, Margaret, because we're over here in Minnesota United land. We're focused. We got a lot of different things we got to be focused on as it pertains to this team. And all of a sudden we look up and we look at the schedule and we see that United will be facing Portland coming up. And lo and behold, Portland doesn't seem to be any good all of a sudden. You guys are super low in the standings, but, like I said, we got tunnel vision as regards to what we've got going on here. So please enlighten us. What's going on so far this season with the Timbers?
Your guess is as good as mine. But let me, first of all, heck, guys, the preface it with there's been a lot of changes. The team traded away for a whole bunch of TAM and GAM and all that fancy stuff. Darlington Nagbe, who was their first draft pick. The first year in existence, there was their first draft pick back in 2011 to Atlanta, and maybe we'll touch on Atlanta later. And followed closely, I guess the first change was Caleb Porter, the head coach, unexpectedly stepping down a couple of weeks after the season ended, followed closely by Darlington Nagbe. And it sounds like, from what I've read, Nagbe maybe wouldn't have been as anxious to head out of town had Caleb decided to stick around. But basically, you've got a fully new coaching staff, 5 games in a row, starting out on the road, which is not easy, particularly in MLS because of how much traveling you're doing.
Right.
It's been rough going. The games themselves, the last 3 weeks, have looked pretty good, but as we saw today, that last 20 minutes, that final third, has just been their bugaboo for probably 3 years now.
So, yeah, what Margaret's alluding to is that today Orlando City and Portland played, and going late on in the game, Portland's leading 2-0, and Portland's winless on the year, correct?
Yes.
And
granted, we're only 5 games in, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. But winless on the year, leading 2-0 late in this game, and Orlando City comes all the way back with 3 goals from the 79th minute on to win 3-2. And so for me, watching that, what stood out is that this team clearly is having some defensive issues. Has that been a primary issue for this team this season?
Yes and no. That's been, you could go back 2 years, and the year they won the championship in 2015, their back duo of Liam Ridgewell and Nat Borchers were old, but they were incredibly reliable. And ever since Nat Borchers tore his Achilles about halfway through the next year and then subsequently retired, the defense just truly hasn't been the same. Ridgewell is a weird case. This week he didn't play because of an injury, but the past couple of weeks it's been coach's decision. He came in, he's the captain. Like, there's been a lot of just weird, almost like weird energy kind of swirling around. This game today, the first the first goal was the first 2 goals were defense. The third goal you will see in most stuff that's written about this game was a really bad referee's call. But regardless, they shouldn't have been able to be let back in the game in the first place.
Sure. Did you have something?
I just wanted to point out in the standings. It'd be easy to say United's on the road. They're heading to Portland, where it's tough to play. They're heading to Seattle, where it's notoriously tough to play. However, Portland 11th in the West, Seattle 12th.
Yeah.
And United's 6th. I mean, United's kind of holding its own, at least early on in the season.
Yeah. I mean, I think United. I think this spell for United is so fascinating because I think it is going to say so much about what they are, especially because Darwin Quintero is going to be playing and in the lineup, so there's not going to be excuse of lack of quality or lack of players because he really immediately fills the void left by Molino, and they'll have a week off, so everyone should be as healthy as can be expected in midseason. And as you just pointed out, their next 2 games, although on the road, are against the 2 teams that are dead last in the Western Conference.
Margaret, you've sent me some of the images from the stadium and kind of the. I guess last year they played in Portland, didn't they? So fans here should have an idea. But for people who don't know, what is a Portland Timbers game like?
It's crazy. Well, you guys, if anybody caught the highlights, the wall behind the goal in Orlando is intimidating, but the Timbers Army is bananas. I mean, there's 22,000 people. They've sold out every game since they came into the league 7 years ago.
Wow.
There's a waiting list that's 12,000 people long.
Wow.
And so you could be on the waiting list for years to get season tickets to the Timbers. The construction that's happening right now and that will happen next off season is going to add another 5,000 so seats, but they're at a weird disadvantage because of where the stadium is. They're downtown, so you're dealing with all the city craziness, and you can't really go out. Why? You have to go up. So there's a limit to the number of seats that they can add, because I know if they could, they would add as many seats as possible to accommodate everybody who wants to come. But the stadium is built, it was originally a baseball stadium, so the way that they've built the seats, they are right on top of you, and it is incredibly loud. And they just chant and scream and jump from an hour before the game starts, to as soon as the game's over.
That's fantastic. That sounds like so much fun, and what a great thing to bring to the MLS. And I think it leads into something Tom wanted to discuss, and is a really interesting aspect, is the different markets in MLS. And right there, Margaret's highlights exactly why the Portland market is an exceptional example of what MLS could hope any market would be. Minnesota United trending in that direction, not there.
But they were selling. I think they've sold out so far this year, and they sold out their
the last game.
Okay, and that was freezing cold.
Freezing.
Yeah, Margaret, it's snowing here in 25.
Oh, I saw those. All the Atlanta guys said it was the coldest game they'd ever played in.
Yeah. Which is funny because Atlanta played in
the snow.
Yeah.
It was like 15 degrees at the end of that game. It was so cold.
But yeah, I wanted to point this out. So first of all, do you think the Orlando City win that United has already had is an indication they can win games in Portland and Seattle just because they've won on the right? Yeah, I'm asking you, Nick.
One of the things I took note, yes. One of the things I took note though is Orlando didn't have one of its best players when they faced Minnesota. Shasta Kleiston didn't play for Orlando when they played Minnesota United. So I think that is, you got to take that with some weight. But otherwise, I would say yes. It's one of the things you can really, one of the main things though, that, like, you can actually be really legitimately holding on to as a United fan at this point, as you try to decide how good this team is or could be, because Chicago has proven to not be very good. So that win doesn't look that great.
Yeah.
And then they've kind of like sputtered through everything else.
Yeah, the Red Bulls was a weird game.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and yeah, for a couple different reasons. But Yeah, so that's why going forward, these
I mean, San Jose's,
these two games, like, man, do you really feel like you're going to know this team after?
Yeah, and it was away, but San Jose is not very good. They're in the Seattle-Portland realm, and they got an early lead. But
exactly.
Regarding Orlando City, I thought it was interesting. Justin Miram, their forward, said certain markets are holding back the MLS. While he's saying in Central Florida, the Orlando City is actually more popular than the Orlando Magic. The Magic, a perpetually rebuilding team, not one of NBA's finest, but I think it's interesting that they have history, right? Or the Orlando Magic in that city, and just kind of even from an NBA perspective, already this Orlando City team seems to be the darling in Central Florida. He was with Columbus Crew. It sounds like Columbus is looking to move to Austin, Texas. And it was interesting. He did point out the success Atlanta and Minnesota have had, as well as obviously the Seattle's, Portland's, Kansas City, which is on top of the standings, LAFC, Atlanta. I guess what are your thoughts, both of you guys, on his comments, and is it maybe a surprise that a city like Orlando is really, embracing this soccer and more than their basketball team?
Yeah, Margaret, go ahead.
I did see that quote. I know Columbus is a very unique case. I feel for their fans. This is not, it doesn't seem to be the fans that are really holding them back. It's the infrastructure and the way that the owner, Anthony Precourt, has come in. It's just a really unfortunate situation because I know, Portland played MLS Cup there in 2015, and my friends who went to the game said the fans could not have been nicer. Lovely, welcoming, didn't want them to win, obviously, but the fans were top notch. But I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago, and we were remarking on how few teams can consistently fill their stadiums. We knocked off maybe 4 or 5. Atlanta, Minnesota, I think, can get there, at least from what I've seen from the league attendance the past few weeks. Portland, Seattle, Kansas City. We went to the Red Bulls game. That's a super storied franchise. Though they have traded away their captains both for the last 2 years, there was nobody at the stadium, and we just couldn't understand it. So I don't know if it's the markets themselves, because I think the markets takes the fans into it, and that's not necessarily fair. But there are some teams where you want to almost take a look under the hood and say, what are you guys trying to do to help your team succeed in this community? Because Orlando City clearly is. You can tell by how passionate those fans are. And Portland and Seattle, they've been around for so many years that you can't help but be a part of the community. LAFC said, we're going to be in downtown LA. This is where we're going to be. And we're going to plant our foot right there. Whereas, the Galaxy is out in Carson. And so I think where the team puts its roots says a lot about how the fans flock to the games.
Yeah, would you agree with the trend that I feel like I kind of see as it pertains to Portland, Atlanta, Kansas City, Minnesota, and I'm thinking of Cincinnati, who's trying to get in, and they have
St. Louis is always brought up as a city.
Amazing USL attendance. And the trend that I notice is it seems like markets that are underappreciated seem to do very well with MLS teams, right? Atlanta's getting has had lost franchises.
And was notorious for fair weather fans.
Yeah, and so it's a market that maybe people wouldn't appreciate. So then when they get
Miami's a weird X factor, right? That's supposed to be Beckham's supposed to bring a team there or whatever.
He is.
And you would think maybe if Orlando City's successful, I know it's Central Florida, South Florida, but maybe Miami's kind of like an Atlanta.
Well, and that's the thing. It feels like too. Any teams that are located closer to Mexico, that really can help because you're going to get more eclectic population and more culturally diverse population at times, depending on where you're at, especially Florida and California, though. And if you have that, you're going to have more soccer fans. That's just math because soccer is the most popular sport across
in the world,
the globe. Yeah. So, the more diverse a population is, the more likely it's to succeed with a soccer fandom, I would say. But market that's it. It doesn't surprise me that New York Red Bulls is a market that's struggling because they're New York is so inundated with sports franchise.
I mean, it's like the LA Rams have to make all these crazy trades to be relevant, right? I mean, the Chargers may not be entirely.
Right,
right?
Yeah, that doesn't seem like that could go.
Well, look at LAFC versus the Rams. It's a perfect example. The Rams have just come back, and they tried to fill the Rose Bowl. Like, why would you try to fill the Rose Bowl? That stadium is enormous, and nobody quite understood why the Rams were moving back anyway. So you came in with, like, 1 foot stuck in quicksand. But LAFC, they knew they knew the right people to bring it at the top. They knew people like Magic Johnson and Nomar Garcia-Parra and all of a sudden, random like Will Ferrell or Mia Hamm. They all seem to have the same vision, and they said, we're going to make ourselves a part of the community. We want people to know that even though these are athletes that we're bringing in and we're paying them a lot of money, the best thing we could do on a Tuesday is come out and be at such and such clinics, sign autographs, just really ingratiate ourselves. And that's, I think, what a lot of people love about teams like Seattle and Portland and Kansas City is that, yes, Portland has the Blazers and Seattle has the Mariners, and I was going to say the Sounders. Sorry, Sounders fans. Or I was going to say the Seattle has the Sonics. But you can't help but be a part of the community, and particularly when players decide to live there full time, you're seeing them like at the grocery store, at the pharmacy. You realize that you really are on the same level in the grand scheme of things.
I think the hard thing, too, you mentioned New England's one that struggles, right? We talked about that last year. New England's number 4, and again, this is early in the East. But you got to imagine how saturated that market is with the Red Sox, with, the Patriots. So
that's what I'm saying, and that's why Portland and Seattle, they're two of easily the most successful MLS franchises in terms of attendance. What do they have in common? They don't have a lot of other professional sports there.
Yeah.
And
I feel New England is one I want to do well because, well, A, I have a friend on the team, but B, they just, I know Jaleel, he's a good guy, but I feel like a lot of times Bob Kraft has done a lot of incredible things for sports in general, but that team just seems to get forgotten. And I would hope that Brad Friedel seems to have brought a really cool new energy to their team, but just get them in a smaller stadium closer to the city of Boston, because, you're going to go to a Patriots game. Who's going to go out on a Wednesday to go to a Reds game, even if they are winning? That stadium is not near anything.
I think if you're the MLS, that you go, why you see this, what you're seeing from Atlanta and Portland and Seattle and Minnesota, and you go to markets that are underappreciated.
And I mean,
you attack that. That's where your value is.
And I think the flip side is you can look at it this way. Just because fans act one way with, like, the Atlanta Braves, for example, or just because to use Minnesota as a market, just because it is a mid-sized market with a lot of teams, doesn't mean the soccer team can't be supported. You have to think of how many soccer-specific fans there are. And it just seems like, going back to your point, there must be a lot in Orlando. There must be a lot in Atlanta. We know here there are in Minnesota. Like, even just pulling into a Target lot, you see somewhere someone has a Loons sticker, and you start to see the scarves and a hat every once in a while, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something to consider, is that you see some overlap, I think, with Wolves and Loons. I'm trying to think of what else is a common overlap, though.
Like during the season?
I mean, in terms of people who are fans of two teams, and they're like, I'm a diehard this and that, And I'm like, otherwise, maybe there's not a lot of Twins fans that are Loons fans, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be one or the other. One team plays every day. The other plays once a week, right?
Right.
And for a lot of the other ones, it's a summer-winter deal. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting discussion. I mean, switching gears back to the matchup of Portland versus Minnesota. So, Margaret, going into this game, I mean, one of the things that struck me when I watched the Orlando game today is, like, all this change aside, all this struggle aside, they looked super good at times going forward. Super fluid and it looked picturesque at times. And Diego Valeri is dangerous no matter what, So and Minnesota United has always been struggling ever since its inception in the league with the most talented attackers, especially a guy like that. So they are susceptible. He could win the game on his own quite easily. I could definitely picture that scenario. But going into this game, how do you feel about the matchup of the Loons coming into town?
I feel better about the attack in terms of, I can obviously only speak from one side. I agree with you. I thought they looked really smooth today. Ironically, the challenges that have come with Darlington Nagbe being traded were really about his relationship with Valeri. Valeri obviously won MVP last year. He is the maestro. Like, literally, that's on flags all over the stadium. But Darlington, he'll get a statue whenever he decides to retire. But his Darlington going away has really opened up the development of the relationship between Sebastian Blanco and Diego Valeri. Blanco came in, big, splashy, multi-million-dollar DP signing last year. The last time we had a multi-million-dollar DP.
What country did Blanco come from?
He comes from Argentina. Okay. So same as Valeri. They grew up together.
Oh, wow.
So they've known each other for a long time. But fans were a little gun shy because the last time the team spent multi-million dollars on a DP, it was Lucas Milano, and it was a big fat mess. So he has really the person who has surprised me in the good way the most so far this year is Blanco, because the team has been trying to figure itself out on the attack. And Blanco has come in and said, you need a header? No problem, I'll get you a header. You need a golazo? No problem, I'll get you a golazo. And he has been a bright spot as, Fernando Adi has not done particularly well. They've brought in a secondary attacker, Samuel Armenteros from Sweden, who was pretty good today, but I would have loved to have seen a little more. And Valeri is trying to find his footing without Nagbe, but also pick up those pieces in his partnership with Blanco that maybe he didn't get to use in the fullest possible extent last year.
Yeah, every name you just said is exactly all you need to know the reasons that Minnesota United could lose this game. That's exactly how it goes down, is the defense is culpable and all those guys get it done. I can totally picture Fernando Adi.
The other name that I would put in the fans' ears is Diego Chara. He's 5'0" and has a big smile and comes at you and then takes your legs out. He's in the number 6. He was out. Him going out with a broken foot in the playoffs last year is the reason they didn't advance. He was on the really poorly taken care of field down in Houston, and it just punched everybody in the gut.
What position does he play?
He's the box-to-box midfielder. So if he did the numbers, he'd be the number 6. But he is the general right in the middle of the field, going in, getting the tackles that nobody wants to do. And the best compliment I can give him is that for other players, he is just 6. He's a pain, and he picks up yellow cards, and he foul you, but then he smiles, and you're like, he's not so bad. But him coming back has really helped them start to turn that offense around. The first 2 games this year, it was pretty awful.
And he didn't play in those games?
No, he came in the 3rd game. He was still rehabbing from the broken foot. So him coming back was a big deal.
Okay.
I mean, it's a combination of talent. The team probably was embarrassed by the loss, right? They're playing at home. I mean, it's not a gimme, right? This is not. You learn a lot about United. It seems to be the theme. Well, keeps on coming
and
out.
This is the perfect perspective, because otherwise you think you just look you really lean on the standings as your narrative of why.
And as Margaret said, it's 5 games in. You know, yeah,
so true. It's still. I mean, given what she's saying, like, this is a postseason team. Last year, MVP was on this team. Is still on the team. Was the MVP last year. How do they still out of all?
And they smoked United, right? It was close until the end, and then they just ran away with it, right?
It's just how is Portland this bad? Like, how are they struggling to get any results? That's what's really interesting.
I mean, my father always said great athletes blame their equipment, but they just can't seem to get anything going. I truly do think this entirely different change in structure is taking longer than people. I think there were some people who were kind of looking through rose-colored glasses. This is a coach who came in. We like him. He seems like he has a good head on his shoulders. He came in from NASL. Giovanni Savarese was coaching the Cosmos here in New York for 5 years. And he was the bridesmaid in terms of getting MLS jobs. People have been wondering why he hasn't gotten an MLS job for 3 years. And they came in, and Merritt Paulson, who the owner of the Timbers, said, I want somebody who speaks multiple languages. I want somebody who has playing. He had a whole bunch of things that he wanted, and Tavares seemed to tick all the right boxes. But I think it's just they're going through some growing pains. It's a totally new playing style. It's playing higher up the field that Caleb Porter didn't. But the game today, they reverted into some bad habits. The 2 substitutions that he made near the end were defensive. They went small defensively, and then all of a sudden you took, Sasha Question scored a goal, Dom Schreier scored a goal, and there was a third goal whose name is escaping me at the moment. But going small and playing defensive is something Caleb Porter would have done. So it was one of those things watching today that just made me want to bang my head against the wall, because they were smoking them for 80 minutes.
Right.
Literally.
They were. They played really
this
well.
game was in the bag. Orlando looked like they had given up. I mean, people were saying on Twitter, this team doesn't look like they care. And then all of a sudden, the difference that 2 subs makes flipped the entire perception, the entire outcome of the game.
And of course, the referee call, as you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, that was bad.
I think the interesting thing about Portland as a market, we were saying maybe the success comes from there's not as many teams, right? The downside to that is that they don't have a football stadium to move in, because it seems like they could maybe football's too big, but it seems like, do you think they could fill, Margaret, a football stadium if they, given how many are on the waiting list and just the passion for the team?
Could they? Probably. Would football succeed in Portland? I don't have any idea. They've been wondering, there's been rumors going on for a number of years whether or not they were going to get a baseball team. They had a minor league team. They were the Portland Beavers, the AAA affiliate of the San Diego Padres, but they moved right as Portland was going into MLS. And there was a decision made. They want to make it only soccer, and so the team went to Albuquerque or something. I don't know. I think there is something really special about that stadium. Yes, to have more fans, to have as many fans as they possibly could fit in would be great. But that stadium has so much history that I think it wouldn't feel as authentic if they were to move into a bigger stadium for the sake of moving into a bigger stadium.
Yeah, it's hard to picture that, like you said, especially with the history.
So I watched that Atlanta LAFC game, and it is cool. Like I visualized what would United look like in the U.S. Bank Stadium, right?
Minnesota United.
Yeah, because
I mean, we got Atlanta United.
I know there's so many.
Don't throw your United.
You're right. Too being too liberal about United, but yeah, I was just thinking, like, when they scored, it did feel like a touchdown, right? Because it's the venue. They're kind of doing the same thing with the pyrotechnics and all that, and it is an interesting league in that you kind of know how many people go to a basketball game, right? Baseball has some variety. I mean, we have about 40,000 here. It's probably 55, something like that in Yankee Stadium, and it kind of varies a little bit. But it is kind of funny that you have 2 expansion teams. United is going to sit in that 20,000 range, right? Kind of like Portland, whereas Seattle or in Atlanta is playing in the games in that. Do you have any kind of thoughts regarding that, I guess, and the capacity and all that, and kind of the impact of the fans in soccer?
I mean, I think it'll be really interesting to see, because United's like, they're trending towards what Portland's been able to do potentially, but it's just trend right now, and it's like wonder where, and that's what's interesting is like the word on the street is that United's not considering expanding their stadium capacity, right? Margaret said that's what Portland's doing, and they have this, and Portland has this crazy waiting list. Season tickets, different. All the I think it was all the luxury seats have already sold out in Allianz Allianz Field, and that's not.
It's probably worse actually to move into a football stadium and have swaths of empty seats.
Yeah, no,
the other.
No, I think that's why it's way better to do what Portland's doing and what United's doing, going small first and
Seattle tarps, right? Seattle tarps off parts of there.
But Allianz Field is already considering they're considering expanding the seats. Like
That's crazy.
Yeah, so we'll see.
Seattle is a weird example, though, because when they came into the league, CenturyLink Field was already there.
Right.
And Seattle had, so they didn't really have to do anything. I think they had to make some minor cosmetic tweaks to make it a little bit more soccer friendly. But, it wasn't like they started playing at UW and then moved over and then, waited to move over until the stadium was done. I think if there was a proper stadium already here in Portland, I think they certainly would have considered it, but the stadium itself is such a part of who the city is that it almost would feel like a disservice to the city to try to move the team outside of the city. I mean, look at the perfect example is Chicago. That city or the team has been around for so many years, but nobody comes to the games. They're not, that stadium is outside of town. It's not easy to get to. They don't fill their stadium.
Margaret, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned earlier that there's like this weird transition this offseason for Portland where they let I think you said they let Porter go or Porter resign.
Porter decided to go.
He decided to go, and then Nagbe gets traded. Talk to me about the fans' reaction to all that and why that took place. Because you also mentioned, we mentioned Valeri was the MVP last year, and you said just a couple of minutes ago on this show that you felt like last season they could have went all the way in the postseason. So that seems like such a sharp turn, both those things.
Well, Porter took everybody by surprise. It just it came out. It was 2 or 3 weeks after the season ended. It was like it was almost like a Friday news dump, and we all kind of turned around and said, "I'm sorry, what?" And then the rumors. There have been rumors about Nagbe leaving rumors about him leaving were not new. Last year it was he was going to transfer to Europe. One other one it was to. I mean, he's got otherworldly talent, and remember. Porter was Nagbe's college coach. So Porter has known Nagbe since he was 16 years old or something. So they have an extremely important, close relationship. Nagbe came in before Porter, but his relationship with Nagbe is part of what I think got Porter the job. So he was not, Nagbe he's a kind of a mercurial character. He's incredibly talented, but also sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get quotes out of him. And so he's just, nobody can really ever tell what he's thinking, but he did actually say, my Caleb leaving accelerated my desire for a new change, a change of scenery. And to Portland's credit, they milked as much money out of Atlanta as they possibly could. Wow. That's a ginormous amount, that they got back for him. Similar, the ones that have happened recently, Dom Dwyer, going from Kansas City to Orlando, Sasha Question even going from the Red Bulls to Orlando. So those numbers we're probably going to see more of those, but it was a big deal. And so the team really had to start over in a very short period of time because this is, MLS is the longest season in all of professional sports. It basically starts in January when you're going to training camp and preseason, and it goes, if you play all the way to MLS Cup, it goes until mid-November, early December. And then you have a super short window to have the draft, to do the off season, to make changes like this. So the fact that the Timbers have some sort of semblance of something going on is kind of amazing considering how much turnover they truly went through.
That's a great point too, especially considering the context of the MLS season schedule. Where did Porter go and why did he leave? Because I'm looking it up and it doesn't seem like I don't see that he's anywhere else right now. And he actually he signed a contract extension January 27, 2016, and then a little more than a year later, the team and him mutually agreed to part ways. What happened? And where did he go?
Honestly, where did he go? He left. He hasn't gone to another team as far as we know, though there were people tweeting today, had Portland won that game, would Orlando's ownership be placing a call to Caleb? that Jason Kreis's seat was pretty warm today. Maybe it got a little cooler after the win. But honestly, I had no idea. There were rumors he was going to try to go for the U.S. men's national team job. He was the U20 or U23 coach, I don't quite remember, when they didn't qualify for the Olympics in London, and that was a huge career disappointment for him. So that always gets brought up whenever, he's rumored for major coaching positions. At this point, it sounds like, nobody's heard. None of the media, at least, have heard from him. He may have gone back to Ohio. I don't know.
Yeah, no,
it's very, very surprising.
Yeah, it seems bizarre, and that's the one thing. And I'm glad you mentioned it, but that'd be the one thing. It kind of seems like, because a lot of people seem to respect him, and he seemed to do a great job with Portland. And there's been those mentions of him with the USMNT job, and that job is still vacant. As of this recording, so I guess that announcement could come at any point, and he could be the hire. Honestly, but I don't know. It doesn't.
It's hard to. Yeah, it's
kind of hard to
tell.
picture that at the same time.
I don't. If I were putting money on it, my guess is no. To be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
My guess is they'd go somebody more like Greg Vanny up in Toronto, and I think honestly, I think he got burnt out. I think Merritt Paulson, for all of his passion and all of what he's done to push soccer forward, to push particularly women's soccer forward, can be extremely challenging. He's emotional. He loves soccer to the point where I think he definitely steps on some people's toes. And there were unsubstantiated rumors that Caleb wanted a little bit more control and that he wasn't going to get that with Gavin Wilkinson, the GM, and Merritt. But my guess is that he just got burnt out. They were going for 5 years. And for Major League Soccer, that's a long time. If you look at the coaches around the league, not many of them have been, the ones I can think of offhand, Peter Vermees down in Kansas City, and Brian Schweitzer in Seattle took over for Ziggy Schmidt halfway through the year. Ziggy Schmidt had been there for 10 years. Like there's a lot of turnover in soccer, and in a way, at least recently, but there hasn't been in places like baseball, football, things like that.
Yeah, I'm looking. I'm super curious about the U.S. national team coaching vacancy and who might take that. I'm looking at some Vegas odds, and Caleb Porter is up there. So
he's just hiding in the weeds.
It's interesting. To put a bow on this, let's hear your prediction for this weekend's result, Margaret.
I hate predictions. If for no other reason that the team is going to be highly, highly charged, I'll say Portland will squeak out with the win. I don't think it's going to be 5-2 like it was at the beginning of last year, but I think this is their home opener. Just keep that in mind. These guys haven't played at home basically since October, and the fans are going to be bananas. If they can keep their emotions under control, I think they'll come out with a win, but I don't think it's going to be a rout. If United can stay on top of their emotions and not let the environment get to them and get a goal in the first 15 or 20 minutes, they for sure have a shot, because as you saw today, the last 20 minutes has not been Portland's strong suit. It's going to be much closer than I think anybody at least on the Portland side wants, but I'll say Portland will come out with a win.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would say I'm picturing a 2-2 draw. I think that makes a lot of sense, given what Margaret said today and highlighting what's going on with the team. And I think as Minnesota United has been a little worrisome in their last few games, and I don't think Darwin. I think it's possible that Darwin hits the ground running, but that's a lot to ask.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
I know it'd be tough at home because there'd be pressure as the first DP, but he is walking. I know that these guys play all over the world, but he's walking into a hostile environment.
It's so hard to picture United not conceding to this offense, to Valeri. I would bet ahead. Like that's something I feel like is just going to happen.
If they're going to
score he will score for sure.
If they're going to win, it'd be like a 2-1, right? They play like a really boring, just like.
I could see a 3-2 though. I could see a 3-2
Really?
very similar to the Orlando game. Yeah, because I could. That's how I could see.
You just can't let them get uncorked. You know, like that's what I felt like what happened last year, where you're like, oh man, they can score a lot really quick.
One result we haven't mentioned yet today, and obviously it's super frustrating because we don't really know how Minnesota would have played against Atlanta because Atlanta went to 10 men so early. But today, Atlanta absolutely thrashed LAFC. It was 5, right? 5 rip. 4 or 5 rip. Either way,
I'll look it up.
Either way, regardless,
it was 5. Yeah, it was a nice firm kick in the backside.
Yeah, so that which is super unfortunate that in a weird way that they went down to 10 men against Minnesota because we'd really be able to look at that game and analyze what that says about Minnesota. We can as nearly as much, but I mean, regardless, the goal Atlanta scored to win that game was trash and just like fluky. So in some ways, Atlanta crushing LA today is a positive, from a Minnesota perspective. So, nonetheless, dang, I mean that's a fascinating.
The next 2 weeks, to reiterate your point from the beginning of the podcast, the next 2 weeks we're going to learn a lot about Minnesota.
Yes,
and it's interesting because then they come home. I think for 2. I think it's Houston and Vancouver. So,
absolutely, absolutely.
I'm curious to see the team against Seattle. It's a very different Seattle team than the one that went to MLS Cup last year. No Jordan Morris, out for the year with a torn ACL. Brad Evans, who was their captain of 9 or 10 years or something, is down in Kansas City. They've had some, talk about growing pains. There seem to be internal, multiple games in a row with red cards, like people not being able to keep control of their emotions, which is weird and kind of fluky, but that team is better than 12th place. And I haven't really been able to dig into what exactly has been their biggest deficiency, but
have they played
Portland potentially
yet?
Be a not yet. They'll play in May, I think. They'll play 3 times this year, but it's a very different team, and Father Time has not been particularly kind to everyone's favorite number 10, Mr. Clint Dempsey.
No.
So I'm curious to see how they do there, because that's a hostile environment. Talk about loud, but good on the teams good on United for trying to knock these 2 out one after the other. I think you're right. It'll say a lot about their emotional and their gravitas to see how they can come out of both of these.
Yeah, and Portland, what a perfect way to set up to try to go to CenturyLink Field and get a result as well. Should be exciting. Thank you so much for joining us, Margaret. I really appreciate it, and your insight, as always, is top-notch.
Sounds good. Good night, guys.
Yeah, appreciate it.
That wraps it up for us tonight. Minnesota United, as we've touched on a few times, very exciting. Next few results, we'll have the whole gang, Mr. Naylor, and other special guests that we'll like to sprinkle in.
Yeah, we like to just bring people on the pod. It's fun.
We do. We enjoy it. We'll be back for you next week to recap the Portland game and bring back everyone else and have tons of hot takes and interesting insights. Enjoy you guys listening. Check us out at zocoverage.com. Check us out on Twitter and wherever podcasts are downloaded. We'll catch you guys next time. Goodbye for now.